In 1979, Jamaica was still wrestling with the aftermath of political unrest, but a new cultural wave was sweeping across the island, a wave that would shape Marcus Augustus's life in ways his parents never imagined. It was the mainstream ascension of Rastafarianism, a movement that had long been simmering but now, fueled by the power of reggae music, was transforming into a social and spiritual revolution. In Green Hill, St. Anne, the Augustus family felt the changes like distant thunder rumbling just over the horizon. The message of Rastafarianism, with its African identity, spiritual freedom, and resistance to Babylon, was finding fertile ground among the youth, and Marcus was no exception. One hot afternoon in early 1979, Marcus stood outside the family's workshop, the rhythmic sound of Jacob's hammering filling the air as he worked on a new project. Marcus was restless, his thoughts not on the carpentry that had sustained the family, but on something deeper. He had been spending more and more time in Brownstown, where a small group of Rastafarians gathered to reason about life, about Babylon, and about freedom. The teachings of Haile Selassie and the spiritual philosophy of Rastafari had taken hold of his mind. Papa, Marcus began, walking into the workshop, his voice tentative but serious. What you think about Rastafari? Jacob paused from his work, setting down the hammer. He wiped his brow and looked at his son, seeing the shift in him that had been building for months. They not getting killed like one time, but them still marginalized. Why you ask? Marcus hesitated, then spoke. Me been reasoning with some brethren in Brownstone. Them talk about Africa, about repatriation, and about how the system a hold on the people. But believe in the message, Papa. Jacob's face remained impassive, though his heart sank a little. He had sensed this day would come. Marcus was of a new generation, one that saw the world differently. The Rastafarian movement, with its dreadlocks, idle living, and calls for freedom from Babylon, had captivated the youth, especially those who, like Marcus, were searching for a deeper meaning amongst the chaos that was Jamaica. You sure about that, Marcus? Jacob asked, his voice steady but firm. Rasta is not just a hairstyle or music, it's a way of life. It means you walk in a different road. Marcus nodded. Me sure, Papa. The way them talk, it makes sense to me. Me feel like me finally find something that speak to my soul. Jacob sighed, his mind swirling with memories of the past. He had grown up in a Jamaica that had fought for independence, but this was a different fight. He had always believed in hard work, in building with his hands, in creating a future for his family through the sweat of his brow. But now, his son was talking about Babylon, about spiritual warfare, and about rejecting the very system that Jacob had spent his life navigating. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Jacob and Grace sat on the veranda, the cooling breeze a welcome respite from the heat of the day. Marcus's words had been weighing on Jacob, and he turned to his wife for advice as he often did. Grace, Jacob began, his voice heavy with concern. Marcus say him believe in the Rastafari teachings and him sound serious about it. Grace looked up from the piece she was shelling, her expression calm but thoughtful. Me could see that coming, she said softly. Him been talking about them things more and more. The music, the reasoning with the brethren, is who him becoming. You no worry about where it going to lead him, Jacob asked, his voice betraying his concern. Rasta no easy, Grace. People still a look upon them funny, still treat them like criminals. Me don't want Marcus to get mixed up in the wrong crowd. Grace set the piece down and reached for Jacob's hand. Jacob, we raised Marcus to be strong and wise. Him is a young man now, and him have all right for choose him own path. Rasta a change the way people think about themselves. Me not see the harm in him finding him own meaning in life. Jacob nodded, though his heart was still uneasy. He trusted his son, But the world around them was changing so fast, and he feared what that could mean for Marcus. In the months that followed, Marcus fully embraced Rastafarianism. He began to grow locks, a visible symbol of his commitment to the movement. He spent more time reasoning with other Rastas and attending small gatherings where they discussed the teachings of Haile Selassie, the need for African repatriation, and the rejection of Western materialism, what they called Babylon. Jacob watched his son change before his eyes, torn between pride in Marcus's conviction and fear for what the future might hold. The community in Greenhill was conservative, and although Rastafarianism was gaining acceptance in some parts of Jamaica, there were still places where it was viewed with suspicion and hostility. Dreadlocks were seen as a sign of rebellion, and those who wore them often faced discrimination, even violence. One day, as Jacob worked in his shop, a local man named Cecil stopped by to commission some furniture. As they spoke, Cecil noticed Marcus walking by, his dreadlocks budding. Your son really gone into the Rasta thingy? Cecil asked, his voice half mocking. Jacob straightened, his jaw tightening. Yes, him believe in a it. Cecil laughed, shaking his head. Hey, me hear the Rasta them a troublemaker, you know. You better keep an eye upon him. People around here don't like them kind of thing that too much. Jacob didn't respond. He watched Marcus disappear down the road, a mixture of pride and worry in his chest. Marcus wasn't a troublemaker, but the world wasn't always kind to those who walked a different path. Meanwhile, the country itself was undergoing profound changes. The political and social climate was still volatile. The promises of the democratic socialist government had led to reforms, but it had also stirred tension among different factions of society. Inflation was rising, and the economic pressure on families like the Augustuses was real. Despite the challenges, the Augustus family stayed grounded, supported by their strong ties to each other. Marcus's deepening involvement with Rastafarianism didn't divide them. Instead, it became a constant thread of discussion around the dinner table, where Jacob and Grace encouraged Marcus to stay true to his values with caution. Marcus, in turn, shared with his younger siblings, Joy and Malcolm, the music and philosophy that had changed his life. Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, Burning Spear, and others filled their home with powerful lyrics that spoke of rebellion, freedom, and a spiritual return to Africa. Joy, now 14, was fascinated by her brother's new worldview, while Malcolm, who struggled to fully grasp it, followed Marcus around like a shadow, mesmerized by his brother's confidence. As 1979 drew to a close, Marcus realized that the more he embraced Rastafarianism, the more he saw the contradictions in the world around him. The poverty, the political corruption, and the oppression of the poor weighed heavily on his heart. He wanted to be part of the solution, but the path forward wasn't clear. One night, while sitting on the veranda with his father, Papa, Marcus began, his voice quiet but steady. You think it possible for real change reach Jamaica? Jacob looked at his son, seeing the hope and the doubt in his eyes. Jamaica always changing, Marcos, but real change, that take time, take patience. We have to build it one step at a time. Marcus nodded, absorbing his father's wisdom. He knew the road ahead would be long, but he also knew that he couldn't ignore the call to make a difference, no matter how difficult. Me want to be a part of the change, Papa. Me want to help the people. Jacob smiled faintly, his heart swelling with pride. Then do it, son. But just remember, the most important thing is to stay true to yourself. As 1979 ended, the Augustus family stood on the threshold of a new decade, a new chapter in their lives. Marcus had embarked on his path, even if it wasn't the one his parents had envisioned for him. The world was changing, and so were they. But through it all, they remained bound by love, faith, and the hope that the future, despite its uncertainties, would be one they would successfully navigate together.